When we think about World War I, our minds often drift toward muddy trenches, deafening explosions, and the loud roar of early planes. But there's a part of that story that doesn't get told much, the story of the women who took to the skies. World War I took place between 1914 and 1918. It was a massive global conflict that really pushed entire nations to get involved, including women. With millions of men drafted into the military, Britain struggled to keep up with labor shortages in factories, farms, and military support roles. Before the Women Air Force was even a thing, women were already pitching in through groups like the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps and the Women's Royal Naval Service. They worked at air stations run by the Royal Flying Corps and the Royal Naval Air Service. These groups did a ton of important work, but when the two organizations merged into the Royal Air Force in April 1918, folks started worrying about losing this talented group of women workers. To tackle that, the British government set up the Women's Royal Air Force as a separate women's branch of the RAF. The main idea was to let men focus on frontline fighting by putting women in support roles that weren't directly in combat. The WRAF was led by Commandant Helen Gwynne, a real trailblazer who later was honored with a Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire. The organization quickly grew, with more than 9,000 women transferring over, plus civilian volunteers. By the time the Women Air Force wrapped up, it had around 32,000 women, making it a key part of the RAF's operations during the war. The Women's Air Force was created to take on essential support roles, so the male RAF members could focus more on fighting and frontline tasks. Known as airwomen, they took on all sorts of jobs, mainly in Britain at first, but by 1919, some had moved to France and Germany. Here's a quick look at what they did: mechanics and technical support. One of their main goals was to train women to be aircraft mechanics, something that was mostly done by men before. These women worked as fitters, welders, and tech specialists, keeping the planes ready for missions. Drivers and transport. Many women drove trucks and cars, making sure personnel, gear, and supplies got where they needed to go around air stations. Their work was key in keeping everything running smoothly. Administrative and clerical work. Some women handled office tasks, stuff like sorting paperwork, managing communications, and organizing logistics. Because of them, the bases stayed organized and efficient. Catering and domestic roles. There were also women working as cooks and orderlies, making sure everyone had meals and that the base facility stayed clean and functional. Other support jobs. Some women took on jobs like personalizing, running storage rooms, and other roles that helped keep the RAF operating day to day. At first, WRAF members mainly worked in Britain, but by 1919, around 500 women had been sent overseas to France and Germany to help out with post-war duties. Even though they weren't fighting, these women followed strict military rules and discipline. Their work was super important for keeping the RAF running well during the last parts of the war and immediately after. The British Women's Air Force played a huge part in World War I by filling in labor gaps and letting the RAF focus on fighting. Whether it was handling technical stuff, logistics, or admin work, WRAF members made sure air stations kept going strong, which helped Britain stay protected and fight back. Their success showed that women could do skilled, technical jobs that usually only men did, really challenging what society believed women could do. The impact of the ladies was especially clear during such a massive war. By 1920, over 32,000 women were part of it, making up a big chunk of the RAF's support team. They helped keep aircraft ready to go, managed communication, and kept the air stations running smoothly, all essential for Britain's military wins. The Women's Air Force creation really changed how women and society viewed gender roles, not just during World War I, but well beyond it. Even though the group was disbanded in April 1920, its impact lasted, shaping ideas about women's rights, military roles, and societal expectations. Women stepping into the Air Force challenged the usual stereotypes about what they could do, especially in technical and mechanical jobs, breaking away from the idea that women should only stick to things like housework or low-skilled jobs. By showing they could handle these roles, they helped push society to see women as capable, boosting the wider movement for women's voting rights. The war's labor needs, along with women proving themselves, gave new momentum to the fight for the vote, leading to partial voting rights in 1918 when women over 30 gained the ability to vote. The success of the Women's Air Force also set the stage for women to take on more roles in the military. Even though the original organization was dissolved in 1920, it was brought back in 1949 as a full-time, peacetime force. During World War II, the Women's Auxiliary Air Force was created to help the RAF. Over time, women became fully integrated into the RAF by 1994, and they finally gained access to combat roles, becoming pilots and aircrew. Pioneers like Flight Lieutenant Jo Salter, the first female fast jet pilot in 1994, and Air Marshal Sue Gray, the highest-ranking woman in the UK military, are part of that legacy, thanks to those early trailblazers in the Women's Air Force. On the economic and social side, the Women's Air Force offered paid jobs and training, giving many of them a sense of financial independence and new skills. But after the war, a lot of women were pushed back into lower-paid or domestic roles as men filtered back into civilian life, showing how many of these gains were temporary. Still, having women in military roles during wartime made a lasting difference, inspiring future generations to enter career fields traditionally dominated by men. The Women's Air Force example also inspired other countries to include women in their military forces. The U.S. made similar organizations during World War II, like the Women's Army Corps and the Women's Air Force Service Pilots. Even though they made some important strides, it wasn't without its struggles. Women were still paid less than men, often just 2/3 of what their male counterparts earned for similar roles, which really showed how gender inequality was still a big issue. And the worst part, the female members weren't allowed to take part in combat, and a lot of folks saw their service as just a temporary thing, so the organization was shut down pretty soon after the war ended. Society also kept resisting the idea of women in military roles, and many women faced pressure to go back to traditional roles once the war was over. All these limits emphasize the complicated reality of what women contributed during wartime. Even though the Air Force opened new doors, there were still big barriers they had to deal with. The women of the Air Force might not have been the ones flying the planes, but they sure kept them flying. They weren't the ones firing the guns, but they made sure they were loaded, fueled, and always ready to go. In doing all that, they pushed back against a world that told them they didn't belong in uniform. Their service shows us something powerful. You don't need to be out on the front lines to make a real difference. That's all for now. If you found this story as incredible as we did, hit that like button, subscribe for more aviation history, and drop a comment below.